Mercedes spent decades convincing you that a good off-road SUV has to cost a fortune. Land Rover built an entire empire on the same idea, and for a long time, they were right. If you wanted a vehicle that looked tough, drove tough, and made your neighbors stop and stare, you had to hand over somewhere between $60,000 and $200,000. No exceptions. Then, a Chinese car showed up that nobody in Europe or Japan saw coming and became one of the fastest-growing new brands in the UK in under a year. It has a flat bonnet the size of a dining table. It has a boxy silhouette that looks like it was designed with a ruler and zero compromises. It has an all-aluminium body structure that most supercar makers would be proud of, and it costs a fraction of what a G-Wagon would set you back. It is called the Jaecoo J6, and right now, automotive engineers in Germany and England are staring at spreadsheets trying to figure out how this thing even exists. We are going to break down exactly what makes this vehicle so different, from the metal it is built from, to the way it sees through its own floor, to the clever trick hiding on its rear door that almost nobody talks about. By the end of this video, you will understand why the 2020s are the decade that flipped the car industry upside down. If you find this kind of content useful, hit that like button right now. It genuinely takes a huge amount of work to put these videos together, and every like helps more people find them. And if you want to catch the next one before everyone else does, subscribe and turn on notifications. Now let us get into it. Why boxy sells? Before we get to the engineering, we need to talk about something that car companies figured out a long time ago. Something that has nothing to do with horsepower or chassis specs and everything to do with how your brain works. Think about the vehicles that hold their value the best: the Mercedes G-Wagon, the Land Rover Defender, the Ford Bronco. What do they all have in common? They are all boxes, flat roofs, vertical windscreens, sharp corners everywhere. None of them are aerodynamic. None of them are particularly efficient, and yet people line up to buy them. Here is why. When your brain sees a boxy vehicle, it does not think about fuel economy. It thinks about survival. Straight lines and sharp angles trigger something deep in your head that says, "This thing is strong. This thing is solid. This thing will protect me." Car companies have known this for decades, and they have been charging premium prices for it ever since. The G-Wagon, for example, has barely changed its shape in over 40 years. Mercedes keeps it boxy on purpose, because the moment they round off those edges, the spell breaks. Suddenly, it is just another SUV. But keep those right angles, and it becomes an icon. It becomes something people save up for years to own. The problem is that this boxy shape comes with a real physical penalty. A flat vertical surface punching through air creates enormous drag. That drag eats energy. If you are running a petrol or diesel engine, you can compensate by using a bigger, thirstier engine. The fuel tank just gets larger. Problem solved, sort of. But what happens when you take that same boxy design and try to make it fully electric? Suddenly the penalty gets brutal. You are dragging that flat wall through the air using a battery pack, and battery packs are heavy and expensive. The more drag you have, the faster the battery drains. The faster the battery drains, the bigger the battery needs to be to hit a decent driving range. And the bigger the battery, the heavier the car. And a heavier car creates even more drag. It is a vicious cycle. Most car companies looked at this problem and said, well, we cannot make an electric off-roader that is boxy and affordable. The physics do not work. Jaecoo looked at the same problem and said, what if we made the car lighter everywhere else? The material that changed everything. Here is where things get genuinely interesting, because the solution Jaecoo came up with is not one most people would expect from a mainstream SUV. The J6 is built around a multi-cavity, all-aluminium body structure. Now, before your eyes glaze over, let me translate that into plain language. Most cars, including expensive ones, are built from steel. Steel is cheap, it is strong, and it has been used in car manufacturing for over a century. The doors are steel, the roof is steel, the frame underneath is steel. It is everywhere. The problem with steel is that it is heavy, and it rusts. Spend enough time driving through mud, rain, and road salt, and steel starts to corrode from the inside out. Most cars deal with this through coatings and treatments, but the underlying vulnerability is always there. Aluminium is different. It is roughly 1/3 the weight of steel for the same volume. It does not rust. And when you engineer it correctly, it can be just as strong, sometimes stronger, than the steel it replaces. The catch is that aluminium is expensive to work with. Traditionally, shaping aluminium into car body parts required a lot of precision machining and hand assembly. It was slow and costly, which is exactly why aluminium has historically been reserved for supercars and ultra-premium vehicles like the Range Rover. If you have ever wondered why a Range Rover costs what it costs, part of the answer is that aluminium is genuinely expensive to manufacture with. Jaecoo cracked this using a process called giga casting. The idea is straightforward even if the execution is extraordinary. You take a massive machine, and we are talking about a machine that generates thousands of tons of pressure, and you use it to inject molten aluminium into a mold in one single shot. Instead of welding together dozens of smaller steel pieces to form a subframe, you produce one single piece of aluminium that replaces all of them at once. This does two things simultaneously. It removes hundreds of welding joints from the vehicle, and welding joints are historically weak points where cracks can start and rust can creep in over time. And it reduces the overall weight of the car dramatically. The result is a vehicle that tips the scales at around 1,800 kilograms despite having a large 69.8 kilowatt-hour battery pack on board. For context, that battery pack alone weighs several hundred kilograms. Without the aluminium structure saving weight everywhere else, the J6 would be considerably heavier and considerably less capable. But the weight saving is only half the story. The other half is what that aluminum frame means for the long-term life of the vehicle. Steel rusts when it gets wet. Aluminum does not. Take the J6 through a river crossing, park it on a salty coastal road for years, drag it through thick mud every weekend, and the aluminium structure underneath shrugs all of it off. Jaecoo designed this vehicle with a 30-year structural lifespan in mind. That is not a marketing line. That is a material science decision built into the very bones of the car. And this brings us to something that goes beyond the specs on a data sheet. Because an aluminum frame that does not flex, does not corrode, and does not groan when you put it through extreme terrain is doing something important for the person sitting behind the wheel. It is giving them confidence. And in an off-road vehicle, confidence is everything. Electric in the mud. Now here is the part that makes a lot of traditional off-road enthusiasts nervous. The J6 is fully electric. No diesel engine, no transfer case, no mechanical locking differentials. Just two electric motors, a battery pack, and a lot of software. For someone who grew up believing that off-road capability came from a big growling diesel with a mechanical drivetrain, this feels wrong. It feels fragile. The instinct is immediate. Water and electricity do not mix. What happens when you drive through a deep river crossing and that battery pack gets submerged? What happens when mud clogs up the motor housing? Surely this is where the electric off-roader falls apart? Jaecoo addressed this fear directly, and the answer is more reassuring than you might expect. The entire high-voltage system on the J6, including both motors and the battery pack, is rated IP68. That means it is completely sealed against dust and can survive sustained submersion in water. Not just a splash or a puddle, actual submersion. The engineers did not just slap a waterproof sticker on the box. They designed every seal, every connector, and every housing around the assumption that this vehicle would be driven into rivers and through deep mud on a regular basis. But sealing the hardware is only the beginning of the story, because the real advantage of going electric off-road is not about durability, it is about torque. When you press the accelerator on a diesel engine, there is a delay. The engine needs to build up speed, the turbocharger needs to spool up, the gears need to shift. By the time maximum torque reaches the wheels, a fraction of a second has already passed. In most driving situations, that delay is invisible. But when you are crawling up a steep, muddy slope and one wheel starts to spin, that fraction of a second is the difference between maintaining traction and getting stuck. The J6 has one electric motor on the front axle and another on the rear. Together, they produce nearly 280 brake horsepower and 385 Newton-meters of torque. And that torque is available instantly. The moment you touch the accelerator, full rotational force goes to the tires. There is no delay, no spool up, no waiting. More importantly, the software controlling those two motors can redirect power between wheels in milliseconds. If the inside rear wheel starts to lose grip on a wet corner, the system detects it almost before it happens and instantly shifts power to the wheels that have traction. No mechanical differential needs to lock. No clutch pack needs to engage. It just happens, silently and continuously, thousands of times every minute. The effect for the driver is remarkable. You point the car at something challenging, you press the pedal, and it goes. Clean, controlled, and confident. It does not feel like a computer is helping you. It feels like the car simply has more grip than anything else you have ever driven. Seeing through the floor. Of all the technology packed into the J6, the feature that gets the most attention is the one that sounds most like science fiction. It is called the 540-degree transparent chassis mode. Here is the problem it solves. When you are off-road and approaching something difficult, a sharp rock, a deep rut, a water crossing you are not sure about, you cannot see what is directly under your front bumper. The bonnet is in the way. You either have to stop, get out, and walk around to check, or you rely on experience and feel to guide you through. Experienced off-road drivers develop this skill over years. New drivers get it wrong and damage things. The J6 eliminates this problem entirely using cameras and a processor. The vehicle has high-definition cameras mounted under the wing mirrors, at the front grille, and at the rear of the car. On their own, these cameras show you the areas around the vehicle. But the smart part is what the onboard computer does with that footage. The processor takes all those camera feeds simultaneously. It factors in the vehicle's current speed, the steering angle, and how much the suspension is traveling. Then it stitches all of that information together and renders it as a live, three-dimensional view on the 15.6-inch central screen. And here is the part that sounds impossible until you see it. The aluminum body of the car becomes invisible on screen. You can see the ground directly under the vehicle, including the exact position of your front tires relative to whatever obstacle is in front of you. You are sitting in the cabin, completely enclosed, and you can see a live, accurate picture of what is happening underneath the car in real time. For anyone who has ever scraped an expensive alloy wheel on a rock because they misjudged a line, this feature alone is worth talking about. For a new off-road driver who would otherwise spend the whole trail anxious about the unseen ground beneath them, it is genuinely transformative. Add to that a ground clearance of 200 millimeters, an approach angle of 26 degrees, and a departure angle of 29 degrees, and you have a vehicle that can handle serious off-road terrain while simultaneously showing the driver exactly what they are dealing with. The anxiety of the unknown is removed. What is left is just the enjoyment of driving. The box on the back. At some point on your way around the J6, you will notice something hanging off the rear door. It looks exactly like a spare tire cover. It is square, it is mounted on the side hinge tailgate, and every visual cue your brain processes says there is a spare tire inside it. There is not. Open it up and you find an external storage compartment, a box, a boot attached to the outside of the car. It sounds simple, maybe even a bit silly, but think about what problem this solves. When you go off-road, you come back with things that are wet, muddy, or just generally unpleasant to bring inside a nice clean cabin. Charging cables coated in mud from a farm track, wet hiking boots, dirty recovery gear. Normally, you either stuff all of this in the boot and ruin the carpet, or you leave it at home and reduce your capability. The external compartment puts that storage outside the cabin entirely. You can fill it with mud-caked gear and close it up without ever bringing any of that mess inside. The interior stays clean. The gear stays with the car. It is a small feature in the grand scheme of what the J6 offers, but it tells you a lot about how this vehicle was designed. Every detail was thought through from the perspective of someone who actually uses an off-roader for off-roading, not just someone who wants to look like they might. And that philosophy runs all the way through into the cabin itself. Inside the future. Step into the J6, and the first thing you notice is how quiet it is. Not just quiet because there is no engine. Quiet because the acoustic glass and the sealed aluminum structure absorb road noise, wind noise, and vibration at a level that would be impressive in a car costing twice the price. The silence is thick and deliberate. The dashboard is almost completely free of physical buttons. There are no rows of switches, no separate instrument binnacle, no cluster of dials trying to look like a cockpit. Instead, there is a large, fast, 15.6-inch touchscreen in the center running on a Qualcomm Snapdragon 8155 processor, the same chip used in high-end smartphones. It is fast, it is responsive, and it controls almost everything in the vehicle. The materials around it are premium without being flashy. The lines across the dashboard are clean and horizontal, which gives the interior a calm, spacious feeling despite the practical dimensions of the car. There is nothing trying to impress you unnecessarily. It just works, and it does it without visual noise. Now, compare this to what you get in a traditional European SUV at a similar price point. You will typically find a mix of physical buttons, some of which have been carried over from older models. A smaller central screen that feels like it was designed 5 years ago, and an instrument cluster that tells you things you stopped needing to look at the moment digital displays became standard. There is nothing necessarily wrong with it, but next to the J6's interior, it looks like a product of a different era. Because, in a sense, it is. The car industry moves slowly. A platform designed today will often underpin vehicles sold 10 years from now. The legacy manufacturers are working within systems and supply chains and design processes that were built for a world where steel was king, engines were mechanical, and software was an afterthought. Changing those systems takes time and costs enormous amounts of money. Jaecoo did not inherit those constraints. They built the J6 on a clean sheet of paper, designed from the start for an electric architecture, an aluminum structure, and a software-first cabin experience. They did not have to make compromises for the sake of a platform that also needed to support a petrol engine or a diesel option. The result is a vehicle that feels genuinely modern in a way that is hard to fake. Not because it has a big screen or a minimalist dashboard, both of which can be added to almost any car, but because every system in it was designed to work together from day one. What this actually means. Let us step back from the specs for a moment. and talk about what the J6 actually represents in the bigger picture. For decades, the formula for a premium off-road SUV has been roughly the same. Take a large steel body, install a powerful diesel or petrol engine, add a mechanical four-wheel drive system with a low-range gearbox, charge a significant premium for the badge on the bonnet, and market it to people who want to feel capable and powerful, even if most of them will never take the vehicle further off-road than a gravel car park. That formula worked because building this kind of vehicle required enormous investment and expertise. Only a handful of manufacturers in the world could do it well. Mercedes, Land Rover, Toyota, and a few others had spent decades refining their systems, and the gap between them and any new entrant was almost impossible to close quickly. The J6 does not close that gap gradually. It goes around it entirely by choosing aluminium over steel, electric motors over a combustion engine, and software over mechanical systems. Jaecoo built something that competes with the established players on the things that matter most to buyers: capability, quality, and feeling, while entirely sidestepping the areas where the legacy brands had their biggest advantages. You do not need 100 years of diesel engine development if you are not using a diesel engine. You do not need decades of steel body manufacturing expertise if you are building in aluminium using giga casting. The technology stack changes, and suddenly, the playing field looks completely different. This is not a car that is almost as good as a G-Wagon at a lower price. That framing misses the point. It is a car that asks a different question entirely. Instead of how do we build a cheaper version of what already exists, it asks, what does the buyer actually want to feel? And how do we deliver that feeling using the best tools available today? The answer turns out to be an aluminium-bodied, dual-motor, software-driven electric SUV with a boxy silhouette, a floor you can see through, and a storage box pretending to be a spare tire on the back door. And it turns out the answer is very good indeed. The established manufacturers are not standing still. They are working on their own electric platforms, their own giga casting lines, and their own software systems. The gap will close, and competition will produce better vehicles across the board for everyone. But right now, in 2026, the J6 is the car that proves a principle that the industry will spend the rest of this decade grappling with. The future of the tough, capable, emotional SUV does not have to cost a fortune. It does not have to run on diesel, and it does not have to come from the brands that have dominated this space for the past 50 years. That is the Jaecoo J6, an aluminium shell, a software brain, 2 electric motors, and a spare tire box with no tire in it. If this video gave you something new to think about, hit like right now. It takes a serious amount of work to research and produce this content, and your support genuinely helps the channel grow. Subscribe if you have not already, and hit the bell so you do not miss the next one. Now here is a question for the comments. If the J6 were available in your country today at a competitive price, would you actually buy one over a traditional diesel off-roader? Let us see where people land on that.